Hi guys, I thought it would be good to walk you through a game that I just played today, and it's one of those games where everything seems to go right. I just follow basic, simple chess principles, and somehow it feels like my opponent never really got a foothold in the game, and never really got the advantage, never really got to play. So I thought it would be interesting to walk through the game and to try and figure out what happened to get that kind of smooth, easy, upper hand kind of game. So my opponent's rated 1319. I've rated 1342 right now. So let's walk through the game, because it's a real beauty and really kind of satisfying. And I think it's a great way to improve your chess by identifying what you do right as well as what you do wrong. So I start with e4. I'm thinking about opening with some more classical openings at the moment. I've been playing a few gambits and stuff in recent weeks, so I thought it no bad thing to go back to something more classical. So I play knight to f3 on the second move, with possibilities of, if he brings out knight to c6, then we've got, the Italian game could come in, or the Re Lopez, the Spanish. But he plays the Philidor with pawn to d6 on the second move, which I remember thinking at the time, and this is a quiet opening. One of the issues that he's got is that his dark squared bishop is now blocked by that pawn there, which is not ideal. So obviously the pawns come out to d6 to defend the e5 pawn, but 2 pawn moves on the first 2 moves, it's a little bit on the quiet side. So I continue to develop. So in my first 3 moves, I've developed 2 minor pieces, okay? And I bring my bishop out. Light square bishop comes out to c4, where obviously it's looking down on this sensitive f7 pawn. This is the weakest point in your position at the start of the game, because the only defender of that square is the king. Okay, black now brings his light square bishop out, pinning my knight onto my queen, which is a decent move. I move d3, so now that my light square bishop is outside of this pawn chain, if I'm going to have my pawns on light squares, then I don't want to trap my light square bishop in, but that's fine because it's already outside, so I figure I can push d3, which then enables my dark square bishop to move out. Black plays knight to c6, very decent standard developing move. I bring my dark square bishop out to e3. It did cross my mind maybe to bring it out to g5, attacking the queen, but then that would really just prompt black to develop his dark square bishop, or to develop his knight, or to push f6 and kick my bishop away. And I don't really want my dark square bishop being chased round and ending up stuck in this corner where it can't do anything, because he's got this nice dark squared pawn chain. I just figured that e3 was a sensible and flexible square to leave my bishop on. Black then comes in with a bit of an attack. Now, you'll notice one of the principles that is often repeated about chess is you don't want to move the same pieces multiple times in the opening. I've used 3 moves to bring out 3 minor pieces, controlling squares on the board. Black has now moved his knight twice. Obviously, the idea is that he's now got 2 attackers on my knight on f3. So if he takes, I will have to take with the pawn. And then the other piece would run away, because he doesn't want to exchange a minor piece for a pawn. That is not a bad thing for me right now, because it then opens up the G file. It would allow me to bring my rook over and further attack black on the king side. So I decide to take with the dark squared bishop, because I looked at the board. I can see black is tending to put his pawns on the dark squares, which means that my dark squared bishop has less play actually than my light square bishop. You know, my light square bishop has got these lovely squares where it can move through black's pawn structure. My dark square bishop has got a lot less play on the board, so I figure that I would profit in the exchange if I swap off my weaker bishop for his attacking piece. Okay, black obviously then recaptures with the pawn, and look at the situation on the board now. I have two minor pieces out in the board. Black only has one minor piece out in the board, right? Because he's used two moves for a knight that's then been swapped off the board, right? So he is behind in development. It's very simple. And he also now has doubled pawns on the d-file. So, you know, for me, and this is what you have to think, you know, if I take that approach, what will the board look like? And is that a preferable situation for me? And I thought it was, so I went for it. It's also my move, so I now develop my B knight. It comes into d2 where it's paired with the knight on f3. So I have now almost completed development. All I need to do is move the queen off, castle, and I'm away. Black is nowhere. Very quiet move now. a6 comes in, and you know, so he's got ideas of moving b5 and try and harass my bishop, but that's not really an option because I can move my bishop here to d5 and attack his rook if I want to. I can move the bishop back to b3. So, you know, if he really wants to try and put pressure on this bishop, it's going to take him an awful long time to shuffle these pawns up the board. And I've always got the option of playing a3 and sticking my bishop there on a2, where it's just lurking like a sniper ready to come in and, you know, put further pressure on f7. So this isn't bothering me at all. It's a move, but it's not a strong one. I push h3. I want to get this pesky bishop out of the way. And also I'm doing two things really here. So I want to break the pin. Three things really. I want black to lose time by having to retreat his bishop. And furthermore, I am pushing my pawns up the board on that king side. So I've got ideas of maybe castling queen side and pushing my pawns up, create a pawn storm on the king side. Black retreats, I push g4, forcing the bishop to move again, bishop moves again, and then I jump in and snatch the loose pawn. So I'm a pawn up. Black brings out his other knight, which doesn't really have anywhere to go. It can't move there, or there. So this knight cannot proceed in the game. And I figure let's push the pawns up. Let's keep going. The threat here obviously is that I get to play h5 on the next move, and the bishop has nowhere to go because these pawns are starting to choke it. So black is forced to play h6, giving the bishop a bolt hole there on h7, where it's not threatening me too much. I mean, if it stays there, it's staring at my pawn chain. So it's not going to be able to break through there anytime soon. And even if I castle queenside, I'm quite happy. So I carry on. I push forward with my threat and force the bishop again to move backwards. Again, look at the board now. You know, all of black's pieces are now on the first three ranks. I've got pieces further up the board where they are going to create more attacking opportunities. So I bring my queen out now to f3, giving me the chance of castling on the queen side. There's no way I'm going to think about castling on the king side now. And my queen, obviously, like the bishop, is now eyeing up f7. This again, I think, is one of those. It's honestly a weak move, right? Yes, it's forcing me to make a move, but when I move the bishop back to b3, nothing's really changed on the board. You know, I'm not concerned about these pawns charging up here in the same way that black was threatened here. It's hard to explain why, but I'm more interested in attacking, in pushing forwards, developing my position. Also, the fact that this pawn has moved up here means that my knight actually has a nice square on c6 where it could jump to, threatening the queen. I could push my pawn forward, threatening his knight and defending that. If the queen moves off the back rank, I could maybe, have ideas of moving my queen up there. You see the difference when you've got your pieces out in the board is that you have these ideas, you have these opportunities, you have all these possibilities. Black has failed to get his pieces into the game very well, and that's why he doesn't have the interesting attacking opportunities. Black then pulls his dark squared bishop out to e7, where it's got nowhere to go. It's blocked in by its own pawn. Remember that move, that Philidor move at the beginning of the game, on move 2. And his knight, which again can't go anywhere, it can't progress forwards anyway, his knight is blocking the bishop off there as well. So I decide to push again with this threat. So, I'm thinking, keep the threats coming, keep the attacks coming, keep my opponent on his heels, having to respond to my attacks. Queen moves forward there, which is fine, and I decide to push forwards with my pawn. Okay, that means that my queen is now defending the knight, which is in a lovely threatening position up there on the 6th rank, where it's really in black's face. That's where you want a knight. A knight is either going to be doing defensive duties in your side of the board, or if it's going to be useful in attack, it needs to be right up the board. It needs to be getting close to the enemy king because it's a short-range piece. So I'm threatening black's knight, force the pawn to take, and then I decide to come in with my knight and attack the capture the dark squared bishop. Now that dark squared bishop isn't a good piece at this point. If we look here, okay, it's not a strong piece, or certainly it wasn't a couple of moves ago when it was totally blocked in. Now it's opened up a little bit, so now that bishop does have play on the queen side of the board, and I'm thinking a couple of things. As the board, if more pieces come off the board, bishops will become stronger. I only have one bishop on the board, black has 2, and at the end of the game, having that pair of bishops can be a material advantage, can be good. So I figure the knight is fairly vulnerable up there, but I can see my knight being less useful towards the end of the game than black's excuse me, dark squared bishop. Plus, if black makes a mistake now and recaptures with the queen, then he's going to drop the rook on a8, which is indeed what happens. What black should have done here is recapture with the king so that the rooks are now paired and can defend each other. But he makes a mistake there, or a blunder, recaptures with the queen instead of the king. I dive in, grab the spare rook. Black is forced to defend with the queen. And at this point I've got a choice, right? I'm a whole rook ahead in the game, and I have the opportunity to exchange queens. If I do so, black will have to move his king, which means he can't castle, which means it's going to slow down the development of his remaining rook. So I go ahead and take. Black has to recapture. Now I thought here about castling, but then I spotted that I have a loose pawn on g4. Yes, I'm ahead. I'm in a winning position in the game. Black also has a loose pawn there on f7. Now the king's been forced to move to recapture the queen. But I figure, why not just, when you're winning, it's very tempting to start to play a bit loose, a bit free, now I'm going to go in for the attack. But in actual fact, to shore up your position, to reinforce yourself, just really frustrates your opponent more. So, I'm a rook ahead. All I need to do now is to start swapping pieces off the board and then if I've got an extra rook at the end of the game, it's going to be a winning position. Okay. Black moves his rook out to defend his undefended pawn, which is good. I then castle, so I'm loving my position right now. Black moves his king along, and I'm thinking now of swapping off knights. This is all I need to be thinking about at this point in the game. Black doesn't want to swap off knights, which is correct. When you're behind on material, you want to keep your pieces on the board. I centralise my other rook. We've got a semi-open file on the E file, so I want to be putting pressure on this pawn, which is advanced. I think this is a mistake from Black. A serious mistake. Yes, the knight is good, but when the board is open like this, a bishop can be much stronger. With that in mind, I do have most of my pawns. I've got 6 pawns on the light squares, so maybe Black's thinking that bishop isn't actually as strong, but you know, I was very, very happy to see that capture there. I decided to recapture with my D pawn. I could have recaptured with the F pawn or with my rook, but I think capturing with the D pawn leaves me with this nice structure on the right hand side, on the queen side of the board, and it also completely opens up the D file. Right? I've got 2 rooks, Black's only got 1 rook. Open files can only mean good news for me. Black comes in with the knight. Difficult situation for Black now. He's put the knight now on a dark square. I've got my light square bishop on the board, so he's got no squares that he can actually move that knight to now that aren't covered by something. I come in with my rook and threaten the knight. I'm trying to persuade him to swap off his knight in return for my bishop, because it's just hastening the end of the game. He decides against. I double up my rooks on the open D file now. You can just see how this is all flowing just so easily now. I'm taking very, very little time on my moves. Just a few seconds. I've got 26 minutes still on the clock, and this is a 30-minute time control. But, you know, I really haven't had to think too much about my moves because I'm playing natural flowing chess. So that knight is defended twice, and it's attacked twice. So I can't capture because I would be giving up a rook in return for a knight, and that's just not worth it. So I bring my rook back where it's doing 2 jobs. It's staying there on the D file, which is what I want. If I get the opportunity and that knight moves, I will quite happily swap off Black's remaining rook. And it's also defending f3. Black pushes a pawn, and I come in with the bishop, because now when that pawn moves, in fact that pawn is actually now undefended because the rook has come across. So I guess he's thinking, I want to move it, which completely makes sense. But now you can see that because I've got more pieces on the board, I've got all these choices. So my bishop just dives in there. I've now got 3 attackers on the knight. The knight is pinned on the king, can't move away. And Black's just now in real trouble. So I snatch the knight because it's a free capture. Black would be foolish to capture the bishop and lose his remaining rook. And I now snatch the pawn on b5 because I realise that if Black recaptures there, that rook is now mine. You know, the king can't recapture. So he has to take my rook. I then recapture with the bishop, saving the bishop. I now have 2 pieces on the board. Black is completely out of pieces. As soon as this bishop moves away off the D file, then my rook is controlling the entire D file, all the way down here, and that will be shutting Black's king off from the entire queen side of the board. And then it's just a trivial case of jumping in with my bishop and my rook and hoovering up these last pawns. So it's really lost position. Plays a5. I move my bishop off the D file into c4, where it's blocking off these 2 squares, and Black resigns at this point. Okay, so let's just whiz back to the beginning of the game. and have another look at that opening and see at what point black loses the initiative and loses control. Okay, standard opening. Philidor defense is pretty quiet. I'm developing pieces, black is developing pieces. I'm still developing. Black then does this double move, which I think is an error, and I exchange. Okay, I think at this point already I'm in a stronger position. Okay, so it was that moving the knight a second time into that position, leaving himself open to an exchange which was not favourable for black. I'm continuing to develop, and now I have the initiative. I can now kick that bishop up the board, snatch the pawn, more attacking, black's having to do more defending. Okay, so this bishop coming out with that early pin really makes me have to think about something. So pin comes out just on the third move, and what's black thinking with this idea? Because when this pin comes out, I can start thinking, right, I might now castle the other side, I might do a pawn storm, and that's exactly what happens. This happens, and now I kick the bishop up the board, keep up the pressure, keep attacking, bring the queen out, threats. Okay, I've now almost completed development. Black has not completed development. Black's bishop, dark square bishop is very poor. His light square bishop is very poor. And maybe the reason for that is simply because he hasn't had the initiative. He's not been able to get his pieces out onto the board because he's just made a couple of errors, and that it's as simple as that. That's all that needs to happen. An ineffective attack, and then the mistake comes, right? And really the game is lost at this point, practically. So what am I going to take away from this? I'm just reminded that chess is very often about simple things, but there are reasons why we have these principles. So reasons why we say don't move your pieces multiple times in the opening. Okay, and I think another issue is the fact that when black moved that bishop out to pin the knight on with g4, he's leaving that bishop in a position where it can be attacked by a pawn. Okay, and if that happens, you lose tempo, you lose time, because you are forced to retreat. Okay, so if you're going to move a piece into a position where it can be attacked by a pawn, expect to lose time. Right, that is offering me a chance to take control of the game, and that's what happened. So get your pieces out, get your minor pieces out into the game. Use your pawns sensibly, don't make those multiple moves, and all of that stuff taken together will give you opportunities to attack and opportunities to win. Simple as that. I'll see you next time.